Hello, everyone, and welcome to this really awesome episode of Super-Heroes of Arabia podcast. Why am I using these words to describe this episode? Is because a lot of what we are witnessing on live action, whether it's TV series, whether it's a movie, a lot of that has to do with this guest. In some situations, directly, and in some situations, indirectly, but nevertheless, his fingerprints can be seen all over. So, here goes the intro. Today's guest is a true multi hyphenate in the world of comics, a writer, editor, and creative force who helped reinvent Marvel with the legendary Marvel Knights imprint, redefined Harley Quinn. Yes, ladies, I specially got him for you. He redefined Harley Quinn for a new generation at DC and became a pioneer in the world of creator owned comics through Kickstarter. So, any one of you in Saudi Arabia and the GCC who is dreaming about having their own comic and how to go about it, this guest is going to be sharing pearls of wisdom. Please welcome the one and only Jimmy Palmiotti. Mr. Palmiotti, thank you so much for giving
Oh,
Heroes of Arabia your precious time.
thank you, SOJ. That's a wonderful intro, much better than I usually get. But I'm happy to be here and talk to your audience. This is great.
We are truly honored. Uh, Words cannot express the feeling that I have, and this feeling is just not mine. This is a collective feeling that the community has for your work, for all the things that you have done for our favorite characters, be they Marvel, be they DC, be they the indie characters, even Painkiller Jane. So, as I had gone through the intro before you, I was pretty impressed by the late artist slash inker Dan Green because I was just mesmerized by his artwork, but I was also, like in awe of his skills when it came to the inking side of things. In your case, your career starts as an inker. You
Yes.
have illustrated a lot of artworks, both inside the covers as well as on the covers themselves. But at the same time, you have written a great deal of stories. Not only that, you even got involved in mediums like video games because, correct me if I'm wrong, you wrote the Punisher video game in
Right.
2005 along with Ghost Rider game.
Yep.
And you have written a lot of episodes for Marvel animation. And then at the same time, we find you as someone who works as an editor alongside Joe Quesada, who is leading a project and gets things done for a company that's trying to get out of a huge mess. How can I define Jimmy Palmiotti in one word?
One word. My wife would have a word, but I don't know if I want to say it here. But I just would say, when they ask me like, how do you like to be introduced, and I like to say creator, like
Right.
person who creates things, because I do the art and I do the writing and I also do the editorial and everything. So I do a little bit of everything. So creator kind of covers all that, right? Somebody who creates, right? That's a simple way of saying it.
That's a simple way of saying it. This is not possible if anyone goes through your track record, if anyone goes through the volume of the work that you have produced for the big two and the indies, even the Kickstarter campaigns. Like you are very much active when it comes to Kickstarter projects. This is not possible without having the passion. On behalf of the community, I want to know what was that moment in time in your life that made you a superhero fan?
So it started really young. I mean, I'm a little older than you. And when I grew up, we didn't have much money. I had three brothers, and my dad had a little paint store in New York, and we didn't have much money. So, like hand-me-down clothing, I got hand-me-down comics from
Right.
my older brothers. So we always had comic books around the house, and We only had one TV in the house, which was upstairs. And if my dad was home, that means sports or football was on. If my mom was taking a break, that means the soap operas were on. So we only got the TV for like Saturday morning for cartoons and stuff like that. So I wound up reading a lot, and I wound up, because it's one of the things that you can do at your own pace. My uncle Louis had a barbershop. He did haircuts for men. And in the barbershop, he had stacks of comic books for people that were waiting. They would read magazines and comics. So he always would let me take a couple of them every time I went to his shop. So I started reading all the different comics, everything: Superman, Archie, Fantastic Four, all these comics when I was a kid. And I wasn't collecting like how we all collect now. I was just I was just reading them and then putting them in a stack. And eventually I realized I had stacks of these comics everywhere in my room, under my bed, and. Um, but I love the drawings in them. I was attracted to the art, of course, because it's a visual medium. And I started copying. My dad had a print shop next to his store, and it was for a company that made business cards and stationery for people. And every time they messed up the address or the name or the phone number on the stationery, they would bring the paper to my dad and say, we're going to throw this out. Do your kids want to draw on the backs of it? So growing up, we used to draw on the back of all these people's stationery, doctor this much, or, whatever. So for me, it was relaxing to draw, and I got to, I would put on music and just sit there and copy the comics. I would try to draw like Jack Kirby, and I would try to do girls like Frank Frazetta, and I did this for a long time, as through all my lower grades of school. And I went to a local school in Brooklyn. I grew up in Brooklyn, New York. And then down the line, I was in high school. I went to the High School of Art and Design. I'm sorry, I went to high school, Midwood High School, which was in my neighborhood where I lived, public school. And one day I came in. It was into the it was 10th grade. And one day I came into school, and the teacher, they said, you have to go down and see the principal of the school. So I thought I was in trouble. I didn't know what was happening, but when you go to see the principal, it's never a good thing. But I went down there, and they gave me an address and 2 tokens to take the subway. And they said, today we talked to your parents, you're going to go into New York and take a test for an art school to see if you can get in. They said, because they thought I was wasting my time in that high school. They said, you're very talented. We need to send you someplace better. And I took the subway into New York. It took like an hour and a half. And I went and took a test, which was basically a drawing test in this school. I just went in, and they said, okay, here's 3 pieces of paper. And they said, you have 5 minutes. You have to draw as many people as you can at a bus stop. And then 5 minutes was ended. I had to sign my name on the paper. Okay. They gave me 3 assignments to draw right on the spot. And then they said, okay, we'll get back to you. We'll let you know. And I took it with hundreds of people were in there. Hundreds of people were taking the test. And then a month later, I got a thing that says I was accepted. They accepted me into the high school. So my 11th, my 10th, 11th, and 12th grade, I went to the High School of Art and Design in New York. And while I was there, I took cartooning.
Right.
And I took cartooning and I took illustration. And it was there when I felt like, okay, this might be something I can do for a living if I learn how to do it correctly. So I was a very good student. And while I was a student there, I also, after hours, I would work for some other artists in the field. I would be like their assistant. And there was a newspaper in New York called the Daily News. And it was like, if you read Superman, the Daily Planet is modeled after the Daily News. Even so much in the first Superman movie, when Clark Kent goes to work, you see that big globe.
Yes.
And going, that's actually the Daily News building. And I got a job there after school working in the bullpen. And the bullpen at the Daily News was like 5 or 6 older gentlemen, very like 70s, 60s, and 70s. They were the editorial cartoonists for the newspaper. So every time there was a story, they need a cartoon. They would draw it that day, and then they'd hand it in. My job was to come in after school every day, sweep up their area, clean the desk, sharpen the pencils, fill the ink bottles up, and then go home. That was basically it. But those guys would teach me things. Like they were great guys, and they would teach me how to draw things. They would show me what they were doing. I would bring my art to show them. I literally, I think I got paid, I don't know, maybe $40 a week. It was nothing, but I didn't care because it was like going, like, to me, it was like going to another art school. And then after that, I went to a city college. Couldn't afford a art college. Again, we just didn't have the money for that kind of stuff.
Right.
So, with government assistance, I went to a city college, and part of my government assistance, it was called TAP and BEOG in the States. It was called. I had to have a high scores, otherwise they were not going to pay for my school.
Right.
So I went for 2 years there. I took advertising and illustration, and I was an honors student. I had straight, perfect scores all across the board. Because I knew that this was my chance. And then when I left there, I actually got into advertising until 1990. I worked in advertising. I had three clients. One was Maybelline,
Right.
the makeup company. One was Pepsi, which was PepsiCo, which was the Pepsi soda.
My favorite brand.
There you go. And I like the Mountain Dew up there. But anyway, and then the other client was a company we worked with, was called Bill Gold. His name was Bill Gold, very famous movie poster designer in the States. And our client with Bill Gold was Malpaso. That was Clint Eastwood's company.
Right.
And so we did movie posters. I think my first Clint Eastwood movie poster I worked on was Sudden Impact. And then for 9 years, I worked on all different movie posters, everything from all the Clint Eastwood ones. I did Raging Bull. We did a whole bunch of posters there. And then in 1991, it was like my 30th birthday.
Right.
And I decided I wanted to try comics. I wanted to get back into comics and see if I could make a living at it. And when I went to high school, I had a buddy of mine that also drew in my class, and his name was Mark Texera. So I reconnected with Mark, and he said, "Listen," he goes, I'm having a problem. They have me drawing Ghost Rider and Punisher, 2 books a month, and I can't do it by myself. Will you help me?" And I'm like, "I will help you if we could do the work up in the Marvel offices," which was on Park Avenue and 27th Street in New York.
Right.
And he said, "Yeah, that's where I work." I says, "I wait till everyone goes home and they let us use the area bullpen." So almost every night I would be up there helping him do backgrounds, helping him, Ghost Rider. He's like, "Here, do this motorcycle and do that background." And while I was up there helping him with break backgrounds, I started showing my work around the offices. I would drop off Xeroxes of my latest work.
Right.
And eventually, whether they got sick of me or the enthusiasm was, whatever it may be, I started picking up inking work. Like, "Hey, Jimmy, can you finish this book in a week? Hey, Jimmy, can you do this story for us? Hey, Jimmy," because all the editors knew me at that point. Again, my advertising background, I knew how to work. I knew how to go in and introduce myself, and my manners were all there.
Right.
And if there's anything about editorial, it's all an editor wants is for their life to be easier,
Yes.
and they want things to go smoothly. I was a guy, I convinced them all I'm the guy to hire, so you don't have to worry about anything. And I did that for years. I started picking up Punisher. I started picking up all these different comics. I started inking, and then they gave me Punisher 2099 with Tom Morgan. And then I started picking up work at other companies like Dark Horse, and people asking me to do books for them. I think I did some Predator comics, and I did a thing called Virus, which was turned into a terrible movie later. And so I started working for everybody, and that was my advertising background. My advertising background said, you can't be loyal to just one company because they'll take advantage of you.
Yeah.
So I started working all different companies. And then every time I would take a new job on, I would say, "Look, I need to get like a raise. I need to get $5 or $10 more."
Right.
Every time I did that, where I was surrounded by people that wouldn't ask for a raise, I would go in and I would just tell them, I said, "Look, even if it's the smallest raise, just to show me you appreciate me, I'll take it." And it always was like $10 or $15 more a page. But when you're doing like 40 or 60 pages a month, that adds up pretty quick. I started doing that, and then in around 92, 93, I met Joe Quesada in San Diego. Went to
92,
San Diego
93.
Comic.
Okay, 92, 90.
92, 93, around there. It's a long time ago, but it's around there. And we started hanging out, and we started working together a little bit here and there. And then the Image guys came out with their books, and we saw what they were doing. And I told Joe, I was like, we could do that. We could do that. And we put aside $60,000 our own money, and we created Event Comics, and we put out Painkiller Jane, and we put out Ash, and we did that for a while, and we're doing very well. At one point, we sold Ash to DreamWorks.
Right,
They flew us out to California. We met Jeffrey Katzenberg and all these guys, and then while we were doing that, this is years later, 97, 98. Marvel's in Chapter 11. They're announcing that they're just not making money. They're going to go bankrupt. They're in Chapter 11. They were looking for somebody to buy them or something at the time because they were just in bad shape. And at that point, the president of Marvel was a guy named Joe Calamari,
right,
who was running Marvel at the time, and he was friends with Gareb Shamus, who ran Wizard magazine.
right.
And he asked Gareb Shamus, he says, I need somebody some creators to come up here and really shake things up because we're in a tight spot. And remember, at the time, they were canceling Daredevil, they were canceling Punisher, they were canceling a whole bunch of titles. So Joe and I met up with those guys, and they said, would you like to do 4 books for us? And we said, yes, but it's going to cost you this much. They were okay with that. We asked for like 3 or 4 things. And then the last thing we asked for is we would like the penthouse apartment in the building to work out of. Marvel Comics had an office on the 13th floor.
Okay,
That was a penthouse apartment.
right.
And they said, well, we have people up there. And they're like, well, you guys figure that out, but we want that to work out of. And they did. They cleared everybody out of there and they gave us the penthouse. And then with Marvel Knights, they had us pick out the characters. We couldn't pick out X-Men. We couldn't pick out anything super popular. So we grabbed 2 of the titles that were getting canceled, Daredevil and Punisher. And
Right.
then both Joe and I were big Fantastic Four fans, and we figured, well, Black Panther's a great character. Nobody's doing anything with him. And then we said, let's do the Inhumans too, because they were in the Fantastic Four as well. So that's how we got Marvel Knights. Then we got all our friends to work for us. There you go. Yeah, yeah. Well, that's Grant. That's a little later, but eventually they started sticking the Marvel Knights logo on everything. Right. That's the initial book, the Black Panther by you. And look who's drawing it. You see who's drawing it?
Mark Texera.
Yeah, that's right. Because we take care of our friends.
But I'm not gonna let you go off that easily. This straight paperback also has this art.
Joe and I doing that
Exactly.
cover. Yep.
Okay, now you've brought us to a very interesting point in comic book history. Now, I will take you back a little bit. Before Marvel approached Event Comics to basically help them revive certain titles,
Yes.
Marvel had approached Image to help them with the declining sales of the Avengers, the Fantastic Four with the Heroes Reborn timeline. Firstly, knowing that the talent that you guys had to offer, plus the talent that they had to offer, why did it become a one-off situation whereby Jim Lee and Todd McFarlane and the Image guys were not part of the Heroes Reborn thing and they were just out of the scene? And next thing you know, we see that Marvel puts its faith in Joe Quesada and Jimmy Palmiotti.
So when they did Heroes Reborn, the nice term or the not nice type is called a cash grab,
Right.
meaning those guys came in to make a ton of money. They did the books and then they left.
Okay, that was their deal.
That was their deal. For us, it was different. We were moving into the Marvel offices. We were going to stay there and produce and interact with their people. I mean, the person that looked after our books was Chris Claremont. Like we had to talk to Chris Claremont, and our art director was Michael Golden, right? So no matter what we did, we had to run everything by these 2 guys, and they were downstairs.
Oh, Chris Claremont. Chris Claremont hadn't he left X-Men in Marvel
He
in
did, but
the 1990s?
he did, but at the time they hired him They gave him an office downstairs, and he was running a certain amount of books. He was like the editorial director for a while. And so he was our contact guy. We ran everything by him. We ran everything, all the art by Mike Golden, who was a great artist in
Amazing.
himself. Yeah. And so how it was different from Heroes Reborn is the Heroes Reborn guys weren't up at Marvel. They were just doing it from California. They did the work, they sent it in, it did well, but then it ended. Our thing was to be there for a while and to work in the office. And then also part of our job was to be like miniature Stan Lees, to go out there and talk about comics and to the media. And we had a bigger job beyond just doing the comics. We were trying to sell comics as being cool, sell comics as being approachable for multimedia. Again, remember back then only Blade was the only thing that came out.
Nine,
Mm,
nine,
right. And that was a great movie, by the way.
amazing.
But nobody was really looking at the characters for movies and stuff. So it was our job to kind of push it and say, hey, look, we got Kevin Smith, who's a movie director. He's doing Daredevil. Daredevil's a great property. You guys should make a film from it. Black Panther is one of the greatest creations, superhero creations. You guys need to look at what we're doing and then go sell it into media. Same thing with Punisher. Same thing with Inhumans. Part of our job was to go out and represent it. And to be honest with you, was to tell people it's cool to read comics. It's not a geeky thing. Everybody reads comics. These movie stars read them. These directors are influenced by them. And part of our job was to go out there and say, hey, studios, you can make some money on this. You can make some movies out of these characters. You'd be shocked how well they would do. And while we were there, that all started happening. It started coming in for Daredevil and the beginnings of Black Panther. And, obviously we had another Punisher movie going on with Tom Jane. And so we had a big the job wasn't just putting out really good comics and making them sell. It was also to try to sell the company as a multimedia company, because up to that point, they weren't doing too well. And mostly they were doing like trading cards, or they would sell a cartoon here and there. It was like nobody really fought over anything. Nobody was really excited to get, superheroes going. So in our couple of years there, everything changed. Everything changed in comics while we were there. All of a sudden we were invited to movie premieres. I was meeting with guys like Wesley Snipes and directors like John Singleton, and all these people all of a sudden not only knew who we were, but they were coming in and saying, hey, can we stop by and say hi? I think I met Wesley like 3 times because he wanted to be Black Panther initially. That kind of stuff happened. And all of a sudden that buzz, that excitement got Disney to come in and make an offer to buy the company.
That was in 2000, and if I remember correctly,
Yeah.
I was reading one of your colleagues' finest work, Old Man Logan, which was part of
Yeah.
the ongoing Wolverine series, Mark Miller's
Yeah.
Old Man Logan. And
Yeah.
it was around that time that I came across the news on the internet as well as on your website that Disney is now approaching Marvel for acquiring it.
Yeah, I mean, that's been, by the way, when it actually does happen, there's years of stuff before it,
Before it.
because at that point I was already gone from Marvel Knights. But what we did is we had to make the impact. Joe and I went in and said, okay, we're gonna, we worked Wizard magazine. We were on every other Wizard magazine. We were doing TV shows in New York. We were doing some morning shows talking about comics.
Right.
Kevin Smith was on late night TV talking about Daredevil and stuff like that. So for us, it wasn't a financial move for us. We did make a little money out of it, but it was more like we want people to respect the comics, what we do, to understand that comics are not something that people have to hide away, or to understand that women also read comics. That's always been a thing of mine. It's like women read. My wife is a woman that reads comics, and she's cooler than most women that I know. It was a multi-purpose thing. There was a lot going on at that time. There was a lot going on.
I'm sorry for cutting in, but because this is like you've touched the crust. Now I need to go into the ingredients, because one thing that puzzles me about your time when you and Joe Quesada were basically like at the helm, you guys are, and this is some valuable information that I got from you, that Basically,
Sure.
yeah, you were interacting and dealing with Chris Claremont, who was the supremo editorial
Yes.
at the time.
Yes.
Okay, I have the Fantastic Four issue. Writer is Grant Morrison. Okay, I have this trade paperback of Marvel Knights with Black Panther, written by Christopher Priest. Okay, then we have Paul Jenkins, who
Yes.
I had the honor to interview recently. He comes up with this limited series of Sentry, and he addresses the origin of Wolverine. Then you have, people like Mark Miller, people like Dan Abnett, so many people who may not have been so much known, but the moment they started to produce the works they produced, people just went wild. What were you guys thinking at the time when you were making these selections, that who's going to be getting this title and who's going to be getting that title?
So there was a couple of rules at Marvel when we did it Marvel Knights. One, we couldn't touch any of the talent they had working for them.
Existing talent? No.
Can't touch them. So we had to bring in all our own people. Joe and I would go to the comic store every Wednesday. We'd buy comics, we'd read, and then we'd go, this guy's really good, or this person's really good. Or we'd go over to DC and talk to people like Garth Ennis and talk to people like Steve Dillon and say, how do we get you guys to come work for us? So we went after two things. We went after people that were our friends.
Right.
Because Christopher Priest was Joe's editor when he first started, so they knew each other. Right? Kevin Smith, we helped Kevin Smith on 2 movies, so he was a buddy of ours, right?
Jay-Z, Silent Bob.
Yeah, I mean, I take my high school buddy Mark Texera, of course, right?
Obviously.
Paul Jenkins, we love what he's doing up at Vertigo, and we're like, let's take that guy. Jay Lee was a friend of ours, so let's bring Jay in. So we went after people that weren't working at Marvel.
Right.
Okay. And then later on, guys like Grant and guys like that. But we initially, like JG Jones was a good buddy of mine, right? So we brought JG in, and Devin Grayson at the time. Mark Wade introduced me to Devin, and I said, you should do a book. And we put Devin and JG together, and they created Yelena.
Elena, yes.
Twitter, right? So we went after people that were, number one, super talented, and number two, they didn't have to be big names because the characters were the big names, right? So we just wanted the best work possible. And as the editors, we would give them the direction we want to go. We'd say it's got to be more grounded. The new Black Panther, Black Panther's got to be like, we got to build up the background of Panther, create the world. With Yelena, we need her grounded like Black Widow, even more grounded, like less powerful, more just about who she is. So with the editorial direction and the people we brought in were so happy to be working with us. We paid them very well,
Right.
but we also gave them starting points. It's like, this is what we're looking for. And then they would come back with a couple ideas, and we would pick and choose what we thought would work. But I think that the key, the secret to it all was that we really cared about every single book we put out. I honestly, downstairs, they were just trying to get books out because they had to have 100 and something books a month and everything. We only had 4 books a month we had to really work on, and we added 2 more later on. We wanted everything to be a masterpiece. And as ridiculous as that sounds, because you can't do that, but you try to do it. And what we did is we overworked. Our coloring looked nothing like anybody else's coloring. Our covers didn't look like other people's covers. We went in and said, the medium deserves a little better covers. We kind of did things like a movie studio in a way. We were trying to cast the best people on the right characters. And because we didn't have to do more than 4 to 6 books, we were able to do that. Now, later on, they added more books, and that's when I left a couple years later, because I felt like I did what I had to do. I felt like I made my mark, and I wanted to go back and do my own work.
Sinatra.
Yeah, but at some point it became all-encompassing. We had no spare time. I would literally, the president's office has a shower in it. I literally would work overnight and then take a shower before everybody came into the building, and then start early in the morning and start working again. I had no time to myself for those years because everything needed our attention all the time. And of course, our freelancers, everybody working for us, were constantly on the phone. Hey, can I do this? Or what about this? And we had a policy of every Wednesdays we call the artists and tell them, "You're doing a great job. We love this page.
Right.
Keep up the great work." We be cheerleaders for our talent, which they didn't get from other places, right? So we try to do things the right way. But when it's that much energy, eventually, you have to move on to other things. And I wanted to do more writing and creating. Staying up at Marvel much longer was going to be tough to do that because they wanted us. They literally, at one point, they wanted to just put the Marvel Knights logo on books we didn't do.
Right.
And that became a big battle. We said, no, you can't do that. And we had certain people step up for us, like Bob Harris and a couple guys, and say, you can't put the label on other books just because it's going to sell more. If Jimmy and Joe aren't touching the books, they don't get a Marvel Knights logo.
I have to ask you one thing, that which year are we talking about when you were quite like decided that, okay, I have to move on from Marvel? And then I'll have another follow-up question with that.
That's a good question. I'm not sure. That's a blur. Early 80s. I'm sorry, 80s.
2000,
Early 90s. Yeah, no, I'm sorry, early 2000. Yeah.
like 2005 when Brian
Well, yeah,
came along?
it could be around there because when I left, I was still inking. I was still doing work too. I was still inking Steve Dillon. I still
Yeah.
did some stuff. Yeah, yeah, yeah. But it's around that time. Around that time.
I want to share something with you that will make you feel better about
Okay.
the sacrifices you were making at the time. While you were at Marvel and Marvel Knights was in full swing, you actually forced uh, a superhero fan who was a Wolverine fan travel miles away from his home just to collect Marvel Knights Origin of Wolverine.
Yeah, that the one Joe did?
Joe was doing the covers, but
Okay.
art was done by Andy Kubert and it was written by Paul Jenkins.
Yeah, Paul and Andy. Yeah. So that was put together after I left, but that was a great book. Again,
That was
Cupid Boy.
that
Oh, that was you. Well, the Cupid boys, Adam and Andy Kubert, or Amanda went to the Cubit schools, so she went to school with them.
with that
And Joe Kubert, yeah, and she was a student of Joe Kubert, Amanda. So,
luckiest lady on the planet, because all my life, because my journey with comics started as a reader in the 80s, and I would see that
right,
ad of Kubert School of Art, and I would just imagine, man, I wish I was in America and I would enroll myself in that school. And she was
sure.
with the Kubert brothers, and her teacher was the legend Joe Kubert himself.
It was Joe. Her teachers were Joe Kubert and Greg Hildebrandt, and a couple other very famous people, because when they started the school they had all these very high esteem people. Yeah, again, it was like hiring, putting Paul back to work on something new. That's what we did. He finished Inhumans, we put him on something else. Sentry, we put him
Right.
on other things. We wanted to keep our guys busy and make it so good that they don't want to work anywhere else but for us.
You succeeded with that, because I'm in London studying there.
Yeah.
The bore subject called accountancy, and
Okay.
my habit is that after finishing my classes at 5 p.m. in central London, I would go to two comic book stores that were right near Oxford Circus,
Okay.
and I can't thank God enough for the fact that when this was happening, and this time is between like 2000 and 2003, I am experiencing this entire phase right in front of me. And for me, my mind is getting blown up. And the point that really made me go crazy was that because I've read Wolverine's Origin that was done by Barry Windsor Smith, I've read
Sure.
books of Chris Claremont and all, and I love these guys. But when I saw the issue of Origin, and I said, man, are they going to finally settle the origin of Wolverine? Am I going to learn what he really is all about? And I had not even a single dime in my pocket. And the issue was more than $60. The first,
What? Oh, because it was older, because it sold out or something, or why was it so expensive?
it became a rare thing. It became a rare thing. And then there was the issue. The one which was more expensive than that was the one that was signed by Paul and Andy.
Sure. You can get them cheaper now. I think you can buy them cheaper now.
No, no, I mean, it was worth it because I borrowed the money from my friend who was accompanying me. I said,
Yeah,
buddy, I'm going to pay you off, even if I pay you off in the next 5, 10 years. But I need this series. I cannot let go of it. So,
that's great.
okay. So now that you have taken us through what was going on in the editorial side of things, the bullpen, and you and Joe were investing so much of your time and effort there, did you have any expectation, any hope that, like, for example, what you were doing for Daredevil, the Guardian Devil storyline, what you were doing with Garth Ennis and Steve Dillon for the Punisher, the Black Panther, would
Yeah.
they become the live action masterpieces that they became?
So the worst thing you can do when creating comics is to worry about what it's going to be outside of comics, right? Because to make a comic, you have to make the comic perfect. And so we never thought about what they're going to do in the films. Our whole goal was to make the greatest comic we could. Because if they ever made a film of it and it wasn't good, that wasn't on us. Our comic is good, right? So that doesn't change anything. The Inhumans TV show, not so good. The
Yeah,
comic and the comic's fantastic though. It stays good. It stays good. So our goal was to make the best comics we can. And then if somebody bought them and made movies, we're happy, that we're very happy. But that wasn't our job. Our job was to make the comic the best comic we could to attract those kind of guys because again, CGI wasn't a big thing back then, right? Like they had to, so we always said the rule was make the comic within the confines of comics, meaning you could do anything. Don't worry about how they're going to do it later in a film or movie. Who cares? We have to sell it to the people that buy the comics. I'm not selling it to the studios. The studios are going to either buy it or not.
right.
Our job is to make a successful comic. What we've seen in the past 10 years is people make comics hoping they get movie deals or TV deals. And I feel like the comics have become more boring because they're trying to ground the budget in the
Yeah,
comic. And I'm like, no, 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 no. There's a reason why we imagine somebody like Galactus in a comic. Do I care how they do him in a film? Yeah, sure. I want to watch it, but at the end of the day, it's just going to come and go. For us, the comics are going to stay forever in people's houses and boxes. So that was the rule. Make the best comic you can. The film stuff will follow. It's okay. They'll do whatever they want. They'll change whatever they want. We don't control it. But the rule is not reversed. So we say we create things in comics, movie peoples take it and do what they want. Not the other way around. We don't
right,
watch the movie and we don't watch them and change our comic.
right,
No, no, we're more creative than those guys. That's 3,000 people doing a comic, doing a movie. Our comic is 4 people, the penciler, the inker, the writer, the colorist, our comic is about only 4 people focusing. Movies are corporate, they're done by committee.
right.
They test market them, all that kind of stuff. So that's always been our rule. So we never worry about it. We never really worried about it. We just figured if we make great comics, people will go and make movies from them. No problem.
One thing I want to bring to the attention of my audience is the fact that while most of them would know you as the man leading the charge with Joe Quesada under the Marvel Knights imprint, what many may not know is the fact that you had one of the most successful runs when it came to writing Dead. Now,
That was
having seen your work, because you have written a good amount of stories for the Punisher yourself, starting with Red Christmas and Bloody Valentine. And obviously, I mean, like you and Joe Quesada, because Joe Quesada was involved with Daredevil for many years as an artist and stuff. I mean, was it a challenge for you to write a character like Deadpool who suffers from a mental disorder called psychosis?
Yeah. So initially it wasn't hard to write. It was just nerve wracking because I wanted to be good.
Okay.
That was the first time somebody at Marvel said, "Hey, do you want to?" It was Mike Martz was the editor, and he
Right.
said, "Look, this person's leaving Deadpool. Do you want to take it over?" And it wasn't a big seller like when I was on it, right? It
Yeah.
was it was one of those middle of the road. He said you can do anything you want with the characters. So I said, "Oh, I have some ideas." I said, "I want to take what works, and then I kind of want to get into his story a little bit and who he is." And I said, I want to team him up with the Punisher at one point, and I gave him a list of things, and he goes, "Just do it, just do it." So
Right.
I started writing it, and I think I got Paul Chadwick did the first three issues, who I loved on Concrete. So I got him to come over. But as I started doing every issue, I got a better feel for the character, so it got better as it went. And I did it for a year until they put a new group, new people on it. And when I was doing that, I was also writing Superboy at DC
Okay.
because they canceled the book, but they gave me the last six issues to do.
I see.
So I was like, sure, I could do that. But basically, I was taking any writing work I can get because people never thought of me as a writer so much, even though we did our own books and everything. And I figured it's good to practice, but it's better to get paid to practice.
Yeah.
So I was learning as I was doing, and I got to work with great artists, of course, who made me look better than I was. But Deadpool was a lot of fun. I mean, I do like comedy in a comic, and it's a very fine line. Like if you're not good at comedy, it falls flat.
Right.
I think writing Deadpool was helped me get the Harley Quinn job, you know,
Oh, okay.
because Dan DiDio said to me, he said, "How do you write comedy? Like, how is it? How can you write it?" And I said, I think you have to be funny a little bit. You have to look at the how dark things and see the stupid humor in it.
Right.
Some of course in films we see that all the time now, but I just it was a fun gig, and Mike let me do whatever I wanted. I think there was only one page where they had to change something in one of the books, but other than that, it was a fun run. I probably would have stayed on longer, but I had another couple of jobs that I promised, and I had moved off Deadpool, but I did my run. I got my omnibus, somewhere on the racks over there.
Congratulations.
I was like looking
Congratulations.
at my book racks over there. There's a lot of books there, but it was a fun run, and it was it kind of helped people say, "Oh, okay, he can write. He can write his own stuff." I think I picked up Jonah Hex at DC right after that too.
I'll be coming to your work on DC also because that is very intriguing for me at least. And there are going to be some questions related to it. But
Sure.
wrapping up your time at Marvel, first thing is that you got Steve Dillon to do the cover for the Deadpool and Punisher team up.
Yes.
Thank you for that because that's a beautiful cover.
Yeah, he's great. He was great.
And now you mentioned that okay, your purpose had always been, you and Joe Quesada would say that okay, we need to produce good comics that can stand on their own ground. They were not being produced for the sake of being adapted into a movie, live action,
No.
animation, whatever is the case. And you mentioned Inhumans series was sadly not as per expectation. But I want to ask on behalf of the community that what have you seen to date that has been adapted on the silver screen, on the TV screen from Marvel Knights that you feel proud of?
I'm proud of it all because I will say out of the gate, I will say I like the Tom Jane Punisher movie. I liked it. I think the only mistake they made was putting it in Florida instead of New York. I heard they did that because John Travolta wouldn't be in it unless they did it in Florida. That's why the only reason why it took place in Florida. But I thought Tom was a great Punisher, and I thought that did the Welcome Back prank story pretty much without Maganucci and all that stuff. But I think the Daredevil TV show really caught Daredevil and Punisher series really caught some of the Marvel Knights energy. But I think the best out of all of them is probably the Black Panther movies because they would have never existed without the book that Tex and Priest did. They would have never existed. I don't think anybody ever thought Black Panther could be that big or that good. And we treated Black Panther like an A-list character, not a B-list or a C-list.
Right.
And I think that's one of the ones that that just came out great. The first movie and the second movie, they were both fantastic. But I'm proud of all of them. I like that the books are the inspiration. They do give us a little thank you somewhere in there, a million
Yes.
credit. You see our names go by quick.
For us, they don't.
No, I know. I mean, thank God Marvel puts end credits because people have to sit through the movie and the credits to see it. But I'm proud of them all. Look, even the Inhumans, they tried. It's not horrible. It just was not as grand as the comic was. I think given it another group of people might have come out better. Who knows? But it's pretty wild to think that all four initial books, were all turned into film and TV properties. Like, you know, years later. That's a pretty good track record. And then we introduce a new Black Widow,
Yes.
and all of a sudden that's a huge character now, especially with Thunderbolts, right? And then Sentry's in there. All of a sudden Sentry's in the movie. So it feels good. I would love to benefit more than I do from it, but I'm extremely proud and happy with all the creators we worked with that they benefit so well from it.
Okay. Now you have left Marvel and you are working for DC Comics. Correct me if I'm wrong.
Yeah, I did. I never really left Marvel. I kind of just did less work for them
Yeah.
uh, because I was also doing some books for Black Bull, which was a small company, and I was also doing stuff for DC and Dark Horse, but I did pick up more DC work. Then DC looked at me more as a writer and less of an artist or just a
Incredible.
creator. They actually turned to me to do a lot more writing.
Okay. Before I start asking you questions about your career at DC, I just want to announce something for my audience. Today, Superheroes of Arabia is hosting the first ever writer on this podcast who has written Harley Quinn. Do you recognize this signature, Mr. Pell?
That's Chad. That's Chad Harden right there.
He came to Jeddah, my hometown,
Cool.
and I got this signed by him.
Well, maybe one day I'll get invited out there and then I can sign the rest of the book for you.
I am working on that. Please wish me all the best. Also, this is the first time Superheroes of Arabia podcast is hosting the writer of Wonder Woman.
Sure, we did a good year's worth of Wonder Woman, Amanda and I. That was a fun book to write.
Okay. Now, first thing is that there is quite a lot of work that is attributed to you as a writer when you are at DC Comics. There is a lot of work where you and your missus are attributed together, credited together. Knowing the kind of ups and downs couples have to go through, I mean, on one side, you are a family, and on the other side, you are also colleagues working on the same project.
Yes.
So, without delving further into the husband wife dynamics, do you recommend for up and coming creators, because there is a great deal of interest amongst females in South
Mhm.
India and the GCC, as well as males, to write or illustrate comics? Would you advise that? Work with your wife.
So her office is upstairs and I'm downstairs.
Oh,
Right. That helps. You know what? I am probably her biggest fan. I love her artwork and storytelling. So it has been fantastic because I adore her and I love her artwork. And she's so much fun to work with and she's fun to be with. So if you have that kind of relationship, I recommend it highly.
right.
Um, some people work, they don't want to have that much right on top of themselves. Everybody's different. I think I look at couples, I look at the Dodsons, I look at all the sweet, yeah, the Simonsons, even the Mignolas, and Terry Moore and his wife, and Mike Allred and his wife. There's a lot of couples in comics, and we talk about it every year in San Diego. We do a panel with all the different couples talking about stories, and like any relationship or any person you spend time with, there's boundaries that need to be kept. You start to understand the other person doesn't work the speed that you work, um, or things that you care about, the other person might not, and things they care about might not be something you care about. You learn these things along the way. You never look at them as a threat. You look at them as a learning experience.
Right.
But I will say that part of making that work is being able to express yourself to them, honestly, to say, I'm not crazy about that. I'd rather not do that. Be able to be not afraid of what the other person is thinking, but to say exactly what's on your mind offers up a clarity that both of you can learn from. So communication is a key. Being truthful is a key. And honesty it's the same rules of life. You don't have to. You don't have to. You should be able to express yourself without feeling threatened or worrying about what the other person's going to think. You can think about it, but honest, I'd rather know how she feels than me trying to guess how she feels. And that's how relationships kind of fall apart because people start assuming things for the other person without actually talking to them.
But here's the thing. I mean, like, you have more experience in life than I do, and many of us.
Right.
Okay, you've been married a long time, more than us, most of us.
Yeah.
So, like sometimes there might be something going on in your personal lives. And at the same
Right.
time, you are colleagues and part of the same team
Yeah.
in an office. So, what's the best way to make sure that the home life doesn't spill over into life?
That's a very easy one.
Yeah, okay.
My home life, my relationship, my time vacationing, my time with her is priority before anything.
Right.
And then we talk about comics, and then we do comics.
Okay.
So my life, my enjoyment of life, my things that I do and things I collect, comic art and things, these are more important than any of the job. Job comes second.
Right.
Okay. Because that's the priority. The priority is your life.
Right.
Meaning all the comics in the world are fun, but if you're not happy, those things don't matter anymore to you. Um, so it is with priority that she is when she's happy, I'm happy. When she's sad, I'm sad. When she's having a difficult time, I'm there to help. And that's it. Priority with your life, and then what you do comes after that. And it becomes so much easier when that first part is working well.
Now, your career at DC is quite impressive because of the fact that the kind of writing work you did made a lot of people fans of your work for the biggest company out there in the comic book industry. But what is more impressive for me is the fact that the kind of characters you took up. Now, working on Deadpool helped you in a way to write Harley Quinn the
Yeah.
comics. But I want to talk about characters like Starfire, Jonah, GI Combat, and Uncle Sam. Now, GI Combat is not a symbol of nationalism. It's a very horrifying comic that is introducing us to the sad reality of war with a bit of science fiction and all that. But overall, if you just cut it down to size, it's basically a war comic that is showing us the ugliness of war and the people that have to go through it. Uncle Sam is a national figure. Okay. Starfire is an alien madly in love. She's a princess and she's madly in love with her Dick Grayson. You have also written the princess Wonder Woman and then Harley Quinn. So, I mean, like when I look at it, because I might not be writing comic book stories, but I do realize the fact that there are very different personalities. Some of them might be having more in common with you. So I'll give an example of, for example, uh, when I interviewed Paul Jenkins. So a lot of the stories that Paul was able to do was because he had experienced something similar or close to it in his personal life, like one of his relatives being a World War II veteran and stuff and things like these. How are you able to manage these very complex characters while you are at the?
I am a student of history. I love history. Not only American history, but the history of the world. I love I study a lot of that stuff. So to write something like GI Combat and GI Zombie and characters like that, my dad was a World War II veteran. He fought in the Pacific theater. He lost a brother in the war.
Sorry.
So when I started growing up, I would research it. I would read the history because I wanted. He didn't want to talk about it ever, so I would read about it. But a lot of times, I mean, you look at a character like Jonah Hex, it's like, okay, I live on the East Coast. I'm New York and Florida and stuff like that. I've never the Western is sort of like a genre that's just like I grew up watching TV shows and everything. But when I started studying things like the Civil War and started looking deeper into how the Indians were treated in the United States and how the history of the United States is a very quick and interesting thing, right? Because it only happened in a small period of time. And it's a brutal story. It's a story of killing and murder and taking what other people owned and away. It's not a very colorful, bright story, but I was always fascinated with the West. And when I was a kid, I would read these Jonah Hex comics, and I guess I romanticized the being like me and my horse being in the Colorado mountains and nobody's around.
Right.
Again, I grew up in Brooklyn, right?
Yeah.
So we're talking about apartments and we're talking about hundreds of people living in your building and across the street and busy. So I grew up with tons of people everywhere. So the fantasy thing for me, with Westerns was, hey, look, I'm on my horse or I'm in the middle of the mountains and nobody's here. How cool must that be? You know? So there's a lot of fantasizing that way. And then being able to write characters like Starfire and Harley and Wonder Woman, what that does, my initial thing is I read all about the characters. I read all the different books that were done before. And then I make a list. Write down a list of the things I liked about the character, like I notice about them, right? And why I like why I like Wonder Woman. Why do I like Starfire? Why do I like Harley Quinn? And I make a list and then I say, why do the fans like this? And I read what the fans, oh, I love when Wonder Woman this way, or I love when this is that way. And I look at that and I look it over and I'm going, okay, if I'm going to write it, I want to write it for everyone,
Right.
the character for everyone. So, like I'll give you an instance with Harley Quinn. So when they hand me Harley Quinn to write, the first thing I say, well, this is all the stuff people like this about Harley. There's no way I can write that character if she's in an abusive relationship with the Joker. That's not who she is. She would have walked away from that. So the first thing Amanda and I do on the book is I have a breakup with the Joker, right? The second thing is, and Amanda says this to me, she says, it's kind of ridiculous a character to only wear one outfit,
Yeah.
especially someone like Harley who has a lot of personalities. And Amanda's like, she shouldn't be weighed down by one outfit. She should be able to dye her hair. She should be able to wear jackets. So Amanda would change the costumes on the covers all the time, right?
Right.
So we did these couple of things right away for Harley, and we never thought in a million years that it would take off the way it did. But it came from us researching the character. Same thing with Starfire. I love the Marv Wolfman, George Perez stuff, right? I love some of the other stuff. I also like the Teen Titans Go,
Yeah.
right? And I said, how can I do this and introduce how can I create an amalgam of this character? And then also, how can I introduce this character? How can we introduce this character to somebody who's never read the character, which is important for me, right?
Yes.
Get an introduction. You can hand the book to someone and then they say, I don't know who this character is. So you have to approach it like that. So with a lot of these books, what we did is we looked at the factors of what's appealing about the character, what's not appealing, and we would base how we started the book out of that, right? Because we want to make sure everyone reads it. We just don't want to write a book for only those 30 people over there. And we don't want to write a book for only people like that version. We always start a series with the fact that if you never know who the character is, we're going to explain it to you right away. And we did that like with Power Girl. We did page 1, we did her origin. Just get it out of the way.
Right.
Because that's what our book is not going to be about their origins. It's going to be about who they are.
who they are, right?
And same thing with Jonah Hex. We didn't talk about his childhood until like issue 16 or 18 when we went back a little bit. And we always feel that's important. So that was always my approach to these characters. And then I would try to find the tone. What do they sound like? You find the two things. What do they want and what do they fear? You try to figure out why the character is complex. And then you shoot from there. Then you go from there. And then you hope it works. You hope somebody likes it.
Yeah, but how do you, as a writer and your with your team, basically like finding the balance, humor and heart versus action?
Well, so I've been lucky because Jonah Hex's heart is in a different place, right? He doesn't like people, but he likes animals and he likes to be alone. So you put your head in the headspace of, that's his point of view. Harley loves everybody, falls in love with anything and everybody, but she's like Bugs Bunny. She causes trouble and then runs away from it. And then Starfire is looking at the world from new eyes, right? She's like, I'm an alien. I'm here. This is cool. What is this? This is great. Like we had a lot of that in the series, but you have to put yourself in the shoes of the character and try to look at the world to their point of view. Even with Wonder Woman, when we did the Wonder Woman stories, I said, I'm not going to do anything with the Amazons. That's been done a million times. Like I don't want to read a Wonder Woman comic where it's about the Amazons again. I've read a million of those. So we tried to look at the stories with Wonder Woman as what are some of the powers she doesn't use that much? And one of them, the cover to the book you held up, was that one of the first things they told us is that she's able to communicate with animals. And I was like, well, why don't they ever do that in a comic? That's such a great power. Like, so we have that. So we started looking at, I don't want to be the guy that just does the same thing over and over. If you're writing Batman, I hate to say it, you're not creating anything new. You're writing the same stories over and over and over. With these characters, I feel like I have to bring something new to the table with them all the time. Otherwise, I'm not interested. And if I'm not interested, it's not going to be a good comic. And I would rather quit than put out a book I don't like.
So the
So
passion and the drive needs to be there in order for you to write something.
yeah, and sometimes you have to find it because Harley was not a character I really cared about, right?
And
So I had to read. I read all the Bruce Timm and the Paul Dini stuff, and I was like, I kind of like her, but she's kind of like in this abuser. Like she's not making her world better for herself. She's hanging out with a guy that's a creep. So I had to find the personality stuff that makes her appealing. And that's what Margot Robbie and those guys did in the movies.
right.
They took the stuff from our book that they loved about the character, that she was sweet, she was kind, she was a little murdery, and she was unpredictable. And they put that into those films, and that's why Margot Robbie was so great in those roles. She nailed it. Like you really, every time she was on screen in those movies became 10 times more interesting.
She's
You know,
Harley Quinn. She's the perfect.
they did the crime of the century by not just making a movie called Harley Quinn. That was it. But it's not, but again, I don't worry about the films. And we met Margot Robbie 3 times, 3 or 4 times, and she's just been terrific to us. She reads all the comics that we did, and we were on the set of Birds of Prey. When we were in London. We went to the premiere, and we went to her private party. She's been wonderful, and she loves the character. But I think James Gunn in the second Suicide Squad movie like totally nailed how she should be. It's a shame we didn't get a movie from there, another movie by James Gunn with just called Harley Quinn. It would have been pretty amazing. But the animated cartoon grabbed onto what we did. And, we made our mark on the character. But I think it comes down to making her relatable to the readers, making the readers care. And we also did 5 years of continuity, right? We didn't just write random stories. There was continuity in our books.
Exactly.
Once we stopped doing Harley, they lost all the continuity in the book. It's not as popular character anymore
Uh,
because of it.
I wish both you and your missus were here in Saudi Arabia when the first ever Comic Con happened back in 2017. And since that time until I believe 2022, the amount of cosplayers, female cosplayers we saw dressed as Harley Quinn, and actually like asking about Harley Quinn comics and asking, I mean, like coming up with their drawings for Harley Quinn, it really proved the fact that the work that you had done was one of the top sellers for DC Comics. Sticking to that, what was your favorite story arc when it came to Harley?
We did this one comic. It was called "Be Careful What You Wish For," and
Right.
it was Harley Quinn finds a genie bottle, and then she keeps making wishes. That one makes me laugh out loud. I think it's the funniest issue, but I think that the storyline, I did like the storyline from issue like 20 to 26, where she goes back to Gotham to see a Joker head on and kick the crap out of him. I did love that story because I felt like a lot of people were waiting for that moment to happen. And then I did like anytime I was able to put Power Girl, we were able to put Power Girl with Harley, was always a fun storyline because they kind of clash, but they're good buddies too. And I just think the chemistry there with the two characters. I mean, how great would a movie that came out called Power Girl and Harley Quinn? Everyone would go see that movie. But I felt like those were times, but I really most proud of the of creating her own universe, meaning having the gang of Harleys, having Red Tool, having Tony, all her supporting cast, the Beaver, everything. The thing when I came in was when Amanda and I came in, we told them we're going to take her out of Gotham right away. And they said, why? And said, that's got a colorful whatever. And I said, yeah, but that's Batman's town. So she's a Batman side character. I said, but if I take her and put her in Coney Island in Brooklyn, she's the main character in the story. And the book name of the book is called Harley Quinn, not Batman's Harley Quinn or not Harley Quinn in Gotham. And that was a very conscious move to try to create a supporting character for her. Because if we were going to stay on the book for years, we needed to do something besides basically what the cartoon does, right? They just keep throwing her with villains and, it's like a who's who story. Our thing was we need to get to know who Harley is. That's the main story. We have to relate to her. When she's sad, we have to feel sad. When she's happy, we have to laugh about it. And I'm not going to get people to care if I always have the Joker and Batman always around the corner in the story. It's boring. It's boring to me. It's been done a million times. So creating a supporting cast is extremely important when you're going to take and isolate a character that's known to be part of a bigger thing. You need to create a world around that character. Otherwise, the book will last 6 issues, and that's the end of that.
Okay. One character that or in fact, two characters that I want you to delve on before we proceed to your contributions as an independent creator. If I ask you to choose between Sergeant Rock and Jonah Hex,
Yeah, Jonah Hex every time. Because Sergeant Rock is, well, because I love Jonah Hex more. Sergeant Rock was Joe Kubert. I always looked at it as Joe Kubert's character.
yes,
So when anybody but Joe Kubert is doing it, I care less about it. I just feel like he was the guy forever. Should always be, with Sergeant Rock. I can do Sergeant Rock comics, sure, but they're not going to be like Joe's. And where I feel with Jonah Hex, I feel like I understand the way he thinks and I get that character probably too much. You know, I feel like I could have wrote Jonah Hex for the next 30 years if the book sold. The book never sold that much.
right.
And making a terrible, not a great movie off it did not help our book.
But here's the thing. I mean, like, fine, these are some things that are part of life. You put in the best effort and things don't work out the way you want.
Yeah.
But when you're writing Jonah Hex, and you are also the one who brought Jonah Hex into Gotham City.
It's me and Justin Gray. I always got to remind people it's Justin Gray and I together.
My apologies for missing out his name.
That's okay.
You and Justin Gray. Now, who is the Western character that has basically made you guys so good when it comes to writing Westerns? Because as you said earlier, you grew up in Brooklyn. You're a New Yorker. You know basketball and baseball. You're reading comics all your life. And next thing you know, you're writing. I mean, you did, correct me if I'm wrong, write a Western for Rawhide Kid or Kid Gold Outlaw at Marvel.
I did for Marvel too. Yeah, I did it for just a 1 issue or a 3 issue thing. I can't remember, but
Yeah.
but Jonah Hex was my main focus.
Yeah. So basically, was it Clint Eastwood Was it John Wayne? Was it this?
Yeah, there's so many. I mean, Gunsmoke on TV when I grew up.
Yeah,
When I was a kid, Gunsmoke, all these westerns were on TV. I used to go away for the summer. I used to teach in a camp. I was like arts and crafts teacher and a counselor. We used to see horses up there and but I think that the real stuff that taught me about westerns was probably reading history, like a lot of history. Um,
I see.
And I try not to put too much history in the books. There is stuff in the background. I'm like, when I'm writing a book, I always know what city they're in and what the temperature is. I always know where they are, right?
Right.
But I think it's everything. I think it was the movies, the TV stuff. I read books and then studying history. And these were the things that made me understand also why Jonah Hex is as miserable as he is,
Mhm.
And again, he's the character that fought in the Civil War for the South and didn't agree with what he was fighting for. So he's a very torn character. And I gotta say, if you want to watch one movie that's probably the closest Jonah Hex movie, even better than Jonah Hex was, I would say The Outlaw Josie Wales is the one you can watch and say, okay, that is like Jonah Hex in a way. That's the closest I've ever seen a film come to the actual character. And I love Clint Eastwood movies. Don't get me wrong. I love Clint movies. But Outlaw Josie Wales was the one that I felt was very much a reflection of the Jonah Hex comic. And I don't know which came first. It doesn't really matter. That's just a great movie. If you've never seen it, it's one of his best westerns, I think.
Understood. Now we move to your collaborative process and the creative partnerships that you have accumulated over the years. So I'm glad you mentioned Justin Gray because you have written with him quite a lot,
Oh yeah.
as well as your missus. So what's your process? I mean, when we are talking about like outline versus script.
Yeah. It's an easy thing. So when I work with Justin, we'll get the job and then we'll say, what do we really want to tell the story about? Like what interests us about the character? Why do we care? Right.
Right.
And we used to go, he worked at Marvel Knights. He was an intern at Marvel Knights, by the way.
Yes. Yes.
And but we would sit around and we'd knock out some ideas and then we would grab onto the ones that we liked and we'd take notes and then we'd have a conversation about it. Like, all right, this issue, we should do this, this, this. And then whoever was open would write that issue and then give it to the other person. And the other person, like myself, or I give it to him, would go and rework some of the stuff and change some stuff. We'd volley it like tennis. We'd volley it back and forth until we felt like two things. Either it was the deadline was there and we had to hand it in,
Right.
or we both felt like, well, that's the best it's going to be. Send that one out. Let's get on the next one. What's the next one are we going to cover? So same thing with Amanda. Same thing when I work with Buddy Scalera or even Dan DiDio or whatever. I like collaborating because I like to throw ideas out there and I have no ego. So if somebody says something, I go, "Oh my God, that's a great idea. Let's do that." Like it's not about winning. It's about finding the best thing, and you have to take whatever ego you have and check it somewhere, like a coat check. Leave it in that room for a while. Don't worry about it, because at the end of the day, all that matters is the story is good. With Justin has like a knack for science fiction. He loves science fiction, and he just has abstract ideas. Where Amanda's more like a dialogue person, less story, and then Buddy was like just another story guy. Buddy's great too, but they each have their strong points, So when I collaborated with them, I'm able to learn a lot from all of them. They help me out and they teach me as well how to look at things a little differently, which is very important because you can't write everything you know, part of our life is empathy. Part of empathy is understanding what other people are going through. Part of understanding what people are going through is to put yourself in their shoes and look at the world the way they see it. And that's why when you write a comic, it can't all be your voice, right? It has to be the character's voice.
Yes.
Uh, Somebody said when I wrote Uncle Sam, they're like, Sam's politics and this and that. So that's your politics? I'm like, no, that's Sam's politics. That's Phantom Lady's idea. That's Phantom Lady, the way she sees it. You have to disconnect. Otherwise, everyone's going to have your brain, and that's not
Yeah.
good, right? As a writer. So when you work with a partner, it's easier to pick on and, we'll go, I'll go to Justin or he'll go to me. Would Jonah really say that, or would he just stay quiet and let the guy talk himself into, screwing himself over? And I'm like, that's a good point. He would just sit there and look at the guy and make him more nervous, so he would keep talking more. You're like, we do that kind of thing. We see it like it's happening in front of us,
Right.
and we see how, yeah. With Jonah Hex is like whatever dialogue we write, we would cut it in half because he doesn't talk that much. He's not interested in what other people think so much, unless it's Tallulah Black. Same thing with Harley. Harley would, when she's nervous, she talks more.
Yes.
And then when she's emotional, she talks less, and her body language is different. She's not bold and but she's slouched, or so we see them as real people, and like real people, we know how they're gonna react because we're building up who they are. And they don't act anything. Jonah Hex and Harley Quinn, you could not be two further characters from each other. Same thing with Power Girl and let's say Daredevil, Matt Murdock. They're completely different. So you have to see the world through their eyes, and that's part of writing, is to get your story down, but then slow down and say, okay, I'm a guy who's blind, but I can see that I'm a person that really hates people, but I'm a bounty hunter and I got to make money.
Yeah.
So I'm going to have to deal with this idiot right now, but I don't have to love him. So how do I get that across to him without saying too much, Or if I'm Jonah Hex, I'm like, I like this person, but I don't want them to know I like them so much because I'm also sick of them at the same time. So when you write your dialogue, you have to sit there and you go, okay, like, what is the best way to say that and yet keep the story moving, right? Because you need to move the story. We only have 22 pages or 20 pages. I need to move a story real quickly. So what's the best way of expressing this without overstating it? Yeah, man, that's the beauty of editing, is that we
Okay.
keep editing our stuff.
Okay. That's the beauty of editing. This is something that I was really looking forward to hear, because by the end of the day, you were making your mark as an editor when you were part of Marvel Knights. But now, I mean, if there is something consistent about your career, it's the editing part. Okay. Are you doing the same thing here when it comes to your paper films project? Because you've created Ash, Painkiller Jane, Queen Crab, Phantasima. Forgive me for pronouncing it.
Yeah,
As,
Fantasima, we call Fantasima, but yeah.
yeah. So, and then you have the Resistance, and I mean, like, it's one thing to, you've mentioned Justin Gray, you've mentioned Amanda Connor, you've mentioned so many of your peers who have worked with you on these projects. But are you still having your editor hat on when you are part of paper film?
I do, but I definitely, as a lot of people tell me, your comics take a while to read. They tell me once in a while.
Okay.
And I always laugh because I always say, you know what? When I was a kid and I bought a comic, I wanted to read it for an hour. I didn't want to read it for 5 minutes, And I said, I wanted a full story. I don't think that's ever left my body. Like, I love chatty comics. I love dialogue. I want more information. I do edit my stuff, like my own scripts. When I drive my letterer crazy, but I pay him extra because he'll letter the book. I'll hand in the finished script. He'll letter it, and then I'll go back and go, you know what? Let's cut that out and let's cut that out. And he has to redo it, but I always pay him because I keep trimming it a little more, a little more, a little more. Sometimes I look at the art and I'm like, well, actually, with Gunslinger, which is Deadly Tales of the Gunslinger, I do for Todd McFarlane right now. I drive the editor crazy. I know I drive the editor crazy. But a lot of times, once the art is matched up with the lettering, I'm like, the art is telling the story. I don't need that word balloon, so I take it out. I'm like, can you take that out? Or the art's not telling the story clearly, and I'm like, I need to add a caption there because the reader's going to get lost. If I don't say it, they're going to get lost there. So editing is really important. When I edit other people, I tend to kind of be a light-handed thing unless the story's not making sense. Then I say, hey, you know what? This is great, but I have no idea what this means. Can you give me a little more clarity in it? again, I'm trying to create books that everybody can read, and I don't want to make readers feel like they're alienated from anything, meaning when they read it and they don't get it or they get lost. I feel like that's the worst thing you can do for a reader is you're sitting there going, I don't understand. Who's this guy? Why is that guy there? So there is a continuity and there is a flow to a comic that nothing else has. It's not a film where the music is going to tell you to be scared or something's coming. We have the drawing and the art and then sometimes a caption to describe something. So within that medium, you have to be clarity is extremely important.
Okay, right. Clarity is extremely important, but a straight fire question. Jimmy Palmiotti, after all these years, an editor or a writer?
Definitely a writer. I mean, the editing, I feel there's a lot of editors out there. People can edit the work, but I wear a lot of different hats. I do, but I prefer, but the, the, the stuff that comes easy to me and the stuff that probably I'll die with 1,000 ideas in my head is I always have ideas for new books all the time, constantly, but I don't have the money or the time to do them all because there's only so much time in a day. So, my buddy Darwin Cook used to come over here all the time. He's no longer with us, legend. And he used to come up here and we used to talk about story ideas he wants to do. And we would talk him out. He lived not right down the road. So I'd see him every other day. He'd come over early in the morning, bring coffee to a manor and hang out with me outside and he would smoke and drink. That's why he's no longer with us. But anyway, we would talk about stories, so many stories. And when he died, he had like 30 stories that no one's ever going to see. You know, he would talk about them. He wrote them down, but they died with him. And so a fear for me is always that I'm not going to be able to tell these stories I have. And that's why I do the Kickstarters, because I can tell the stories. I don't need a publisher. I don't need somebody. And again, publishers want to own a piece. I get it. And I can hire my own artists and make sure they own part of it and make sure they get money. But I have so many other stories I want to do, but I'll take on something like Deadly Tales of Gunslinger to make sure I pay my bills. And also it's fun. But so there is that part of me. So I think creator is always going to be before editor because, I can be an editor for other people, and I do it. I help people with their screenplays a lot. I'll go in and say, okay, this is a dead spot. I would take that out. And why is this in here? It makes no sense in the story. It's a skill I learned forcibly because when Marvel Knights, I had to look at everything that came in and read it and make sure it was okay. But I think creator is definitely a writer is a much better title for me, I think.
Okay. Now you mentioned the Kickstarter bit with which you have been involved for quite some time. You have used a great deal of independent work and you just shed light on the fact that, like, for example, it cuts the publisher out and grants a great deal of independence to the creator.
Yes.
Now, for the aspiring comic book talent that wants to tell their stories visually as well as in writing in Saudi Arabia and the GCC. Can you
Yes.
just like elaborate a little bit that why is creator owned work important for a professional such as yourself? Okay,
Okay.
because you don't have any shortage when it comes to recognition. You're getting invited to the premieres. You are very much well known within the big two, but still, you I mean, when we follow you on X, when we follow you on your social media, there is a lot going on when it comes to independent projects that are there on Kickstarter. So,
Right.
can you just elaborate that why is creator owned work
Sure.
important?
Okay, so it's really fun to work at DC and Marvel on characters that I grew up with. It's a blast. It pays bills. They pay better than anybody, but I don't benefit that much from it. So they'll sell the comics. I get paid. Sometimes I see royalties on it, not always. Even things like Marvel Knights and making all these movies, we get invited to them. Once in a while, they'll throw us a couple of bucks, but nothing substantial, nothing I can live off of. So comic book creators are the lowest end of the totem pole of entertainment,
Right.
especially writers. Okay, because we can't sell our artwork. We don't have any, right? Uh, so it's great working for companies, but as a creator, I want to leave a legacy of things that I created. It's great to work on Batman, but without me, there's no Painkiller Jane, there's no Ash, there's no Fantasima. Now, it doesn't matter so much that they're not big creations. The thing is, it's still mine. And with that, I can control what happens with them and I can control their future. And then when I'm dead, whoever I leave them to, they can go run with them. But I want to leave my net something. If I'm in this field for years, I want to be able to say, hey, I also created that. And again, we don't benefit when I worked on Harley, right?
Right.
There were billions of dollars in licenses with that.
Yeah.
You shirts and hats and costumes and keychains and toys and every kind of thing you can imagine. Amanda has them all now. And they would send us like on the dollar what they made. We would make like 1/100th of a penny on it, next to nothing. They would send us a check once in a while, a couple of bucks here and there. But if I told you broke it down for you, you'd be like, that's horrible. You guys should be rich from this. That's not the case, right? So you learn that. And so you learn that, well, you know what? I do Painkiller Jane and I sell a license for a toy. I got paid 500 times more
True.
than I made off of another company. And it's not even that much, but it's so much more. So there's a part of being a creator where you want to own your characters and you want to have a life outside of being a DC and Marvel guy. I love the creators that work for DC and Marvel, but I wish we saw more original characters from George Perez. I wish Darwin Cook had more of his own characters. I wish Joe Kubert, and Joe Kubert did his own work, right? He did his own books, but I wanted more. I wish I saw more, even though Joe Kubert and Will Eisner are probably the greatest examples of guys that did their own books and created their own stuff. But I would love to see more of this by creators. What's really what really they want to do, what they see as a thing. And again, I understand the fans want to see us on Daredevil and they want to see us on Harley and I get it. But I think it's important to create your own things. And there's no such thing as a failure at create your own. Even if the book never sells, you still did it. There's no such there's no such thing as having a because look, I've done 25 Kickstarters. Not every one of them did really well. But like I'll give you an instance, like Pop Kill was a Kickstarter we did.
Right.
Now Man Cave is putting the books out. The first issue sold 55,000 copies. That's huge for
God,
an indie
is
for an
getting
indie comic. Yeah. And so it has a second life. Like this book has a second life, and it's all mine, Dave, and Juan. We did that ourselves, right?
right.
So there's a real pride that comes with something you created and people like that you're never going to get from the Supermans and the Harleys and the Batmans. Believe me, I love that people love what I do so much. But for me personally, itch that I have to scratch is doing my own characters.
So
And
if
I could do both at the same time.
so if I just like try to summarize it in minimum words possible, it's basically the privilege of ownership, independence, and then at the same time, if it succeeds, you tend to benefit instead of
Yes.
the middlemen that are there.
Yeah, we're talking the difference between $1 and hundreds of dollars.
Right.
You know, look, if if you're a fan of the comic creators, you have a bunch of guys and girls you like, right? You're a fan of a certain amount of comic characters,
Right.
people, right? Creators. You really want them to be successful. So they can keep creating more. And if they're not doing well in comics, they go away. They go to other jobs. We lose the guys like Joe Madureira, all these different guys. They make more money doing games or they make money doing other stuff, and you don't see them doing comics anymore. It's because the comics aren't paying enough. They have kids and they say, you know what? I need to feed my family. I'm just not making enough doing Superman every month. I'm just not making it. So that's why I always say it's important to support creator owned, because usually that means your creator is taking a risk because they're not always successful. You know that. We see them every month. They're not always successful. So It's why I buy comics from every creator-owned guy. Every guy and girl that comes out with their own stuff, I always buy it because I figure I want them to keep drawing. I want them to have some success. And a lot of times they're more fun. The comics are just crazy. They're just, some of the ideas is so out there, but that's the fun of it, right? That's the fun of comics. You can do anything.
Yeah.
It is a medium. It is a medium not limited by budget.
Okay.
You know,
Touched upon a lot of harsh realities on which I want to ask you a few questions. But
sure.
before we do that, I want you to share a special message about your ongoing or upcoming Kickstarter, which your fans in the Arab world need to know about.
Well, I'll tell you because the next one, I'm fulfilling the one we just did. The Painkiller Jane one just ended. So I have another one coming up, but I would rather your fans go to paperfilms.com. That's my website. When you go on the website, a pop-up comes up to put your email and you get subscribed. I don't do a ton of emails. You get like 2 a month, maybe, right? That to me is most important because that's me connecting with you guys and saying, hey, here's what I got coming up, or here's where I'm going to be the next time I'm overseas. This is where I'm going to be if you guys want to come say hi, or here's my next project and here's some preview art, or even, hey, look, today it's 30% off everything on the website. If you want to go buy something, right? You go buy something. For me, that's the most important thing because that's the center of my universe. I put everything on that website.
Right.
So when I get subscribers, it really helps me out, right? Um it creates an audience for me that I can connect with directly. And I don't have to depend on sites like X or Instagram or all that stuff. I'd rather connect with the fans directly. I'd rather be able to email the people that buy my work directly and say, hey, look, this is some cool stuff I got coming up, or here's some artwork I could show up. And that's where paperfilms.com really is good for me. Sort of like your Patreon, right? They support your Patreon. They listen to your videos. They're supporting you to keep doing things like this. Extremely important for you to continue doing it. Otherwise, you can't. And we don't want to lose the creative people in this world. We want to support the creative. Supporting the arts is one of the main things in my life. So
That's the thing I learned the hard way when I became the content creator. For us, because obviously three monotheistic faiths, namely Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, they all three of them have the concept of the hereafter. And right now, I think the moment I became a content creator is when I realized that how important it is when we transcend to the other reality, that we get judged by the fact that how many people were in the world on whose faces we brought a smile, or if somebody was,
yeah,
or a story which I came across from one of the comic book writers, that his story was the one that actually helped a person not commit suicide.
right.
So
Right. We do that every day when we communicate with people we love. I'm not saying they're gonna commit suicide, but I say sometimes they're dealing with depression, and it's good to hear the voice of somebody that cares for them. Even a simple phone call is very important for people to know that there's people thinking. People use texts and all that kind of stuff, but I think the voice, the human voice on the phone, a quick phone call. Hey, how you doing? That you came up and we were talking today, and I haven't talked to you in a while. It's how are things going? Even if they're telling you, they're dumping their weight on you, whatever. I always think it's very important to touch base with the people in your life. Let them know you're thinking about them. And we have it all the time, right? We talk about something and then you go, oh, I remember my cousin, blah, blah. I'm the guy that always, when that happens, I always call that person that day. Because I feel like there's a reason they jumped into my head that day. So let me call them and make sure they're doing okay and everything. That's it, very important. But I'm sorry. I'm sorry to interrupt you what you were
no,
saying,
no,
but
no, no. It's
it
perfectly
reminded me of that.
it's perfectly fine. In fact, it just adds value because the world is a chaos.
Yes.
And if we are doing what we are doing, and if it is helping people, feed, if it is lightening their burden from within, if
Right.
it is bringing a smile on their faces through our work, aside from doing what we can do as individual human beings, then I think it's a great service to humanity, and it is a much needed service to humanity.
I always say it's easier to be kind than to be mean. It's so much easier and so much more rewarding.
I used to.
I what's that?
I used to.
Right. Well, and and sometimes that happens, right? You're in a place where things are dark and you look at we can look at chaos two ways. We can look at it in a hopeless way where we get swept up in it, or we can walk into a room of chaos and start rearranging the furniture to make it more comfortable. It's the point of view is extremely important. If you're watching the news every day,
Yeah.
remember this one thing. The news does not tell you about good news.
Yes.
Okay. Nobody turns on the news and they said, hey, this guy just won the lottery. That person's dog had three puppies. This woman gave birth. And this guy just bought a brand new house and he's moving his family. That is never the news. The news is this plane crashed. This politician said that. It's there to get you riled up and to get you watching it 24/7 because in the end, all these news stations, all they are is programming. The,
Yeah.
the reason there's a commercial. My thing is, there's more good news going on than bad news in the world. You go outside, you see a neighbor, you talk for 20 minutes, maybe you help an older guy help with his garbage, whatever it may be. That's the energy I look for, and that's the energy I stay in. I stay in that positive energy. The negative energy is for people that can't, they need to find that light, right? They need to find that light in their life. They need to stop going back to the same bad news, to stop going online and picking the same fights. It amazes me how much time people spend on putting down a movie that hasn't even come out yet. Like, how ridiculous is that? That's like I'm going to tell you a meal 3 weeks from now is not going to taste great. How do I know that? Until you eat it, you don't know. And so it does come down to perspective and the place people's heads are in. It's funny because when people are very sick or very old, they almost have a calm about them sometimes because they've come through reality that they settled in and they're appreciating whatever little things are happening. There's a calm. I guess some would call it an epiphany where
Yeah.
they, right, where they realize like, this is, all right, this is the situation. But I woke up today and, it's sunny out and let me go outside in my garden or let me listen to the birds or let me relax or let me call my uncle or my aunt or my grandmother. So I just think turning off the TV helps a little bit. And I also think comics are unique in the fact that you can read them at your own speed. It's not like a movie where they dish everything out to you. And comics, you literally can read it, finish the page, and go back and look at it again and look at a panel again and look at it. It's a unique experience. And I think I find the people that read comics are some of the nicest and smartest people I've ever met. They're extremely kind to each other. I go to conventions, people are helpful, they're kind, they're flattery, they're complimentary. They're so happy to be in a room full of other people that love the same stuff they do. And and it's a great thing because it shuts out the outside world, which is basically, let's be honest, it's very powerful, very rich people who have nothing better to do than to wield that power and make life terrible for other people. There's no reason I don't need more land. There's no reason for wars. Wars are ridiculous, right? Because we all want the same thing. We have a common thing. We all want happiness. We want security for our family. We want good health. It's ridiculous we haven't evolved past all this greed. I mean, I think most of it is based in greed, but I like to think the comics community definitely has a lot of love and a lot of we can all say, oh my God, that Frank Miller Daredevil is amazing, and we can sit there and talk about it for hours. And I think that's the beauty of this business.
You shared a great deal about the negativity that is coming from the news, from television, and so forth. And I don't like to bash a particular platform, but a platform like X, for example, has become a platform where when I was growing up, and I grew up in Jeddah, Saudi Arabia, and we had very limited access to comics. So maybe the reason I feel nostalgic about the 80s and the 90s comics is the fact that whenever you opened up the comics, all you got was good news, happiness, exciting story, exciting stuff happening. Let 1984 Secret Wars ad The first time when I saw it, I still go back into that feeling. Now
Sure.
what's happening is that we are coming across a lot of ugliness, some of which you touched upon in a very professional way, meaning that when it comes to sharing the booty, if you will, when it comes to characters and so forth. So when we are talking about independent work, when we are talking about Kickstarters, okay, Jimmy Palmiotti is becoming a very prominent name, has become a very prominent name. There are some other creators like Eric D. July. And
Fiolito.
do we see that like these Kickstarters will one day lead to some kind of a correction in the comic book industry, which has been
Hmm.
dominated by the big two?
I think what happened with the Kickstarters is the big two sees that certain creators could just walk away and do their own thing because they built up an audience, right? A fan audience.
Right.
It's why when you look at new comics, they're not pushing the artist and they're not pushing the talent. Because once the talent have an established name, they know they can walk away from the company. I don't know if you noticed lately, but the comics focus more on the characters and less the creators. We see less creators being talked about. We see less, even artists. We just see the art, but we don't hear from them. It's what Disney is really good at is like, for many years, people thought Walt Disney did all the movies.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's a Walt Disney movie, right? It's his name.
It's his name. Yeah.
But it's all these different people drew those movies and, did all. So corporations want you to invest in the characters. Even so, we see it in the movies where they want you to less invest in the actors. Because once the actors are popular, they have to pay them more. So they don't like that, right? So there'll be three different Captain Americas and there'll be three, whatever it may be. You'll see this over time. So what Kickstarters did is it showed that the creators can have a second career just on their name that they built up over the years. And they're not crazy about that, but that's corporate thinking, right? Because all they care about is money. They don't care about, I mean, let's be honest. The people working on the books care about the fans, but the people that are paying for everything, they don't read them. They're just like, how much money did it make this year? We need to do more books. Double up the books. And they don't push, you don't see full page ads in comics. Greg Capullo is back. You don't see that anymore. That was Wizard Magazine. Wizard Magazine taught everybody the creators' names and who they were and their faces, right? We would see their faces. In my Kickstarters, my credits are always photos. I want you guys to see everybody that's working on the book.
Yeah.
They don't do that in comics. I tried to get that done for Marvel Knights. I said, I want to do photo credits. And they're like, no.
Can I share an embarrassing story with you? Okay. In the 90s, I read a work by Ron Mars. Never saw his picture. A wonderful guy lands in Riyadh, Saudi Arabia, 19 for Stan Lee's SuperCon. I'm having my smartphone filming, and I go to him and I say, "Hi, welcome to Saudi Arabia," and all that. And can you please introduce yourself? I still wish I could shoot myself in the head. Why I said that? For some reason, in that moment in time when he's about to reply, I accidentally or fortunately look at his
Badge.
or the
Yeah.
bag, the table, because he had
Oh, table name. Yeah.
that there. And I'm like, "You're on Mars? You're on Mars?" And he's like, because he's a very nice person. I mean,
Yeah.
and I apologized to him on spot. I said, "Mr. Mars, I'm sorry because all my life I've been reading your stories for the Silver Surfer, and I just did not know what you looked like. Had it
Sure.
been for Wikipedia, I would never had known how Jim Shooter looked like."
Right. Right.
So,
No, it's true. It's true.
but
Well, I tell you, when we did Marvel Knights, we why my pitch was MTV is popular. People know what the singers look like now.
right,
We need to do that for comics. And they were like, no. But Wizard Magazine did it every month, right? They had top 10. And they would put the photos in the magazine. I feel it's important, but I understand why corporations don't want to promote that because they don't want me walking in and say, hey, I'm important. You have to pay me $10 more a page. And they're like, oh, like they don't want to pay more. That's corporations, right? They want everybody to be cheap, work cheap and not reward what you're doing. So I always felt it was important to know what the creators like. Plus, when I was a kid, I was dying to see a picture of what does Joe Sinnott look like and what is
Yes.
Michael Ludo. I know what Kirby looks like because they would put his photo once in a while. Oh, he draw himself in the comic in Fantastic Four. And Stan Lee, so he put his picture on everything. That was very smart of Stan, right? Because everybody knew Stan Lee. Um, so I always said that.
Not to mention that he also, there is a lot of bashing going on about Stan, but during his tenure, we come across the What If comic book where we see Stan, Jack, Flo Steinberg, and I think it was Joe Sinnott or somebody else.
Yeah, Joe, probably Joe, Jumping Joe's in it. Yeah, yeah.
And then let's not forget those full page introduction pages where all the artists and the writers, their pictures would be there. Did a lot than he gets credit for, unfortunately.
Yeah, no, no. Stan, I worked for Stan. I hosted his panels. He's a great guy. These are people talking about Stan after he's gone. I always remind him, I'm like saying, look, he took credit for a lot, but he also was surrounded by people that never went out there and promoted themselves. Stan was out there waving that flag for comics forever. Growing up, I would read his soapbox. I would,
Yeah.
and I met him when I first met him, I was beside myself. And then when I started working up at Marvel, he came up to me and said hi. And then I would do conventions and they would ask me to host it. So me and Stan would be on stage. And he was great. He was sweetheart. He always said to me, he'd say, Jimmy, if you ever need work, come see me. He always say that. Boom. Thank you. But he would come over all the time and just make sure I had work. He would check on me. Great guy. People are gonna badmouth once they die, they can't defend themselves anymore, but he has a legacy of changing a lot of people's lives. And he was the one that went out there and shopped the characters and made sure people outside of comics knew not only what the comics were, but who he was. And he was the character. He was in the movies.
In the Arab world, most of the purchases that are coming in are from the Gulf countries, namely Saudi Arabia, UAE, Bahrain, and so forth. What is it that? How do you feel about your stories crossing cultural boundaries? Do you have a special message for the community here?
I am always excited when anybody new reads anything I do, especially where you're from and that part of the world, because it must be, it must be a little bit of an alien perspective, right? Because I have a different perspective than people, we grew up differently. But it's extremely flattering. Just you taking the time with me is an extremely flattering. I feel honored to being able to talk to you, because the thing is, we make these things. We want everyone to read them. I don't see the world as having boundaries. I just see it as it's why in my Kickstarter I always offer a cheap digital version because I want people to read it. I understand shipping is so expensive these days, but I always do a digital for like $5 or $10 because I want everybody to read. I want everybody to read that, and I want everybody to have fun. I wish the best for everybody. I hate that we still fight wars that was started hundreds of years ago. I hate that people have it's amazing to me how everyone has they all want the same things and yet we fight over the stupidest things. And also religion, right? Religion is such a weird category for me because I live in a neighborhood. I have three different religions right around me. I am happy for everybody. Whatever they believe, that's fantastic. As long as you're not killing everybody and whatever, you know what I mean? Like the positive energy from a religion is so wonderful, you know, and people's beliefs are their own and they should, America was built on that. You come here, religious freedom, any religion you want. It's just, it's a shame that a lot of that gets spoiled by people. But at the end of the day, I'm excited if any of my books make it to you guys and they're translated to different languages. It's fantastic for me. I don't get to hear about it because Marvel and DC, these guys, they never send us one. Like, I don't know what an Arabic version of my book looks like. I don't know what a Japanese version looks like. We don't get them, right? But I do when I do travel. Somebody will bring them, and I'll be like, "Oh, look at this! Look, this is so cool! It's in another language." It's exciting for me because I feel like we do them for the world. I don't do them for the United States. I do them for everybody. I want the work to get to everybody, the message to get to everybody. I think it's so limited to think that my books are only going to one place. I do get deals with my own independent stuff. People will buy the rights to do them in other languages, and I sell them all the time. If anybody wants to put it in Arabic, they can call me, or in French, they can call me and I send the rights. I give them a little deal and they publish it themselves. But I'm hoping with the digital books it goes worldwide. I love the fact that you are reading comics where you are. That's fantastic. You know what that means to me? That means one day I can go there and we can go grab lunch and have a beer and talk about comics.
And I have the perfect place for you. Two places, in fact, one in Jeddah and one in Riyadh. And that's a
Perfect.
promise. Now, the final question.
Yes.
You have achieved a great deal in your life. What do you hope is the takeaway from your body of work for fans and fellow creators?
I hope my takeaway is that you can pursue your dreams and make a living from it. Uh, I also hope that my work way after I'm gone continues to give people a half-hour break in their life, uh, to take their mind off their problems, even for 20 minutes or an hour or 2 hours. Or my work I can leave behind where people might read something I do and laugh and giggle and appreciate or just have that moment, because I think that is the closest I'm going to get to immortality in my life. And not that I'm sitting around wanting to be immortal, but I'm hoping that what I do has made somebody else's life at least easier, even if it's only for a couple minutes.
With that, our very special episode comes to an end. I am holding on to my emotions right now because there's a lot going on within me. Seeing someone whose work because I'm one of those individuals who also reads the credits when it comes to the editors, not just the writers and the artists.
There you go.
And it's like, for me, it's like I'm interviewing either Jim Shooter or Roy Thomas.
Well, thank you. That's very flattering.
And
Hey, look, we'll see each other again, and we can do this again. We can do a part two down
we
the
will
line.
definitely do a part two. Mr. Palmiotti, thank you so much for your time. We owe a great deal to you for sharing so much pearls of wisdom with us. And without taking much out of your time further, I
Uh,
would like to bring this episode to a close. If you have a final thought, please share it, sir.
Do I'd say so, Jay? Thank you so much. This is a great opportunity. It's so nice that I'll be able to communicate in another part of the world where you're in. And everybody, make sure you support this man. This is a good man. And I will see you guys later in the comics and or live one day in person where you guys are. So everybody just try to relax and enjoy the day.
As we say, for any future good happening, inshallah. Thank you so much, Mr. Palmiotti.
All right, buddy. I'll talk to you soon. Okay.
Thank you. Thank you.